Hello everyone, welcome back to Chosun Yonghwa Review. Today we are looking at the film Supun Sole Inda, known in English as A Forest is Swaying. Directed by Chang Young-bok and released in 1982, A Forest is Swaying tells the story of a Korean War veteran named Park Song-Ryong who takes it upon himself the task of replanting a forest of pine trees that was burned to the ground by American bombers during the war. All the while raising a young orphaned girl whose parents were killed by the Americans. The film opens with the Song of the Forest, followed by a foreshadowing monologue about people who enjoy the forest around Mount Maeryeong, but don't know of the man who is responsible for replanting it all.
사람들은 무성한 숲을 기쁜 마음으로 바라보면서도 그것을 가꾼 인간의 숨은 노력과 정성에 대해서는 생각지 않는다고들 합니다. 그러나 전쟁으로 불타고 거칠어진 산기슭에서 누가 보건 말건 숲과 함께 한생을 살아온 사람이 있었다.
We are then introduced to Song-Ryong, hard at work with his small team planting baby pine trees along the barren mountain range. They take a small break, and Song-Ryong entertains his adopted daughter, Song-yi, with a harmonica. Song-yi, by the way, is unaware that she is an orphan. We are then interrupted by a kind old man on horseback, bringing with him more pine tree sprouts, along with news that a provincial man will be arriving soon at the request of the local leader, Won-gi, to help with the restoration of the forest. Much to our surprise, however, the botanical expert is actually a woman named Sinok, who, after getting off a locomotive and seeing off her father, casually hikes 37 kilometers, 22 miles, in a single day to reach the mountain. Talk about a fucking alpha. She eventually makes her way to the mountain in question when she stumbles across a strawberry patch. She's quickly scolded by Song-Ryong for helping herself. She introduces herself as the botanical expert sent by Won-gi, and all is forgiven, except for the red stain on her shirt as a result of her eating strawberries. Yeah, she totally hiked 37 kilometers, and that's the first stain you got. Okay. Sinok lodges with Song-Ryong's mother for the night, who introduces her to Song-yi and explains that she is an orphan here, and that her parents were killed by the, quote, Yankees who bombed the mountain. Get wrecked, best Korea.
저의 어머니는 이 산이 불탈 때 잘못됐다네. 미국 놈들이 불을 놔서 그렇게 됐어. 그래요. 그런 불행이 있었군요.
The following morning, Sinok is up bright and early to begin her assessment of the soil to see if it's possible to save the forest. She confides in Song-Ryong that the soil is simply too damaged and lacks the nutrition in the soil to support the pine trees. She suggests that another species of tree could be considered. Upon hearing this, Song-Ryong up and leaves without a word and urges his comrades to continue, saying that with hard work and perseverance, flowers can grow even on rocks. I mean, I guess they technically can. Furious from being blown off, she writes to Won-gi that he refused her advice and that he would need further persuasion to discontinue planting pine trees. Upon receiving a letter from Won-gi telling him to give up on pine trees at the recommendation of Sinok, he angrily confronts her in his home. Sinok tells him that she only made the recommendation to prevent him from suffering an impossible job. Song-Ryong cuts her off, however, upon hearing that a storm is fast approaching. Threatening to ruin all of their hard work with heavy rain, Song-Ryong himself is nearly buried by a mudslide in the storm, but luckily is rescued by his comrades who all manage to salvage their work. Sinok, impressed by Song-ryong's effort the night prior, visits Song-yi's grandfather in the small tree nursery behind their home. She asks him why Song-ryong continues to work despite it simply not being possible to replant the forest with pine trees. The old man tells her that in 1954, 1 year after the ceasefire, Song-ryong came to their small mountain home to tell the family of their son Jong-sam's death during the war. Jong-sam, who is Song-yi's real father, sacrifices himself by charging a hedgehog, by which I'm guessing they mean a variant of the M4 Sherman equipped with hedgerow cutters, which had the name Hedgehog, though I don't think those were used in the Korean War. Maybe, anyways, so that the rest of his unit could advance, and that his last request to Song-ryong was to deliver some pine tree seeds to his wife after the war so she could plant them to remember him by. Upon handing over the seeds, however, the family tells him that his wife was also killed when the U.S. dropped incendiaries over the mountain, leaving poor Song-yi an orphan. The following morning, after surveying the scorched landscape with the local workers, he heads back to the family's home where Song-yi, now awake and seeing Song-ryong in his uniform, mistakes him for her father and runs to him. Song-ryong embraces the sobbing Song-yi, realizing that his place is here now. He decides to stay and fulfill Jong-sam and his wife's dream of tending to the forest, while assuming the role as Song-yi's father.
불탄산이 마음에 걸려 떠나질 못하도 그러더니 제가 전선에서 목숨을 내대고 지켜낸 이 땅이 그렇게 무참히 불탔는데 어떻게 내가 공부하러 가겠는가고 하면서 정삼이가 못다 받들고 간 장군님의 뜻을 받들어 이 매령산에 나무를 심어보겠노라고 하며 제 대신 원기를 대학에 보내고
Having heard the heartbreaking backstory, Sinok begins to have a change of heart towards Song-ryong and develops an admiration for his devotion to Song-yi and the forest, wishing that others could have the same devotion to their work. She greets him in the morning by showing him the nursery she'd rebuilt that was destroyed in the flood, complete with growing pine tree sprouts, signifying her willingness to help Song-ryong achieve his dream. Song-ryong is jubilant at the gesture and apologizes for being confrontational before. The two quickly make amends, however Sinok comments that even if they succeed, it will take 20 to 30 years before the forest would be fully replenished. Song-ryong happily admits to this, saying that it isn't out of selfishness that he replants the forest, but for the enjoyment of future generations. The quote, "A society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in," comes to mind.
이제 여기에 숲이 우거지면 가족들을 데리고 한번 오십시오. 지금은 이렇게 흙사태에 묻혔지만 이 묘목들이 뿌리를 내려서 기둥감이 되고 내 머리에 흰서리가 앉을 때쯤 되면 이 매령산은 푸른 숲이 설레일 겁니다.
As winter falls, Sinok writes to Won-gi that she's aware of the background between him and Song-ryong, saying that she will stay to help him and continue to write about his devotion and exploits, signifying that she's beginning to fall for him. Oh, and the plot thickens. Meanwhile, Song-ryong assaults a train conductor for cutting down a live tree to fuel their locomotive that's run out of fuel. He later apologizes via a note not to cut down living trees, followed by giving them a batch of wood from the dead trees to fuel their way home. Despite hearing of this supposed success, Won-gi remains unchanged in his belief that reforestation is futile. At the behest of his advisors, he makes his way there to personally confront Song-ryong. Also, I just feel I should point out that Won-gi was one of the locals who lived on the mountain when Song-ryong first came there in 1954. He's kind of just put into the movie without any backstory until much later, so I just wanted to let you all know. He finds the two among the snowy landscape, lamenting that the snowfall had killed all of their tree sprouts, ruining all the progress they'd made. Won-gi furiously asks why they continue to waste their time on what they know to be a futile effort. He reluctantly asserts his authority as the head of the reforestation department and orders him to stop wasting his time. Song-ryong refuses, but his act of defiance is cut short when he faints, presumably because of exposure to the cold.
성나
Wang Yi helps to revive him and tells him as a friend to stop, and instructs Shinnok that she should return soon as well, much to the ire of Shinnok, who had no intention of doing so. Shinnok ultimately, reluctantly, leaves on horseback after a tearful bout of regret with Song-Ryong, who apologizes for wasting her time. She bids Song-Ryong farewell as the sled pulls her away as a sadness begins to fill her heart. Time marches on, and Shinnok's mother tells her of potential marriage prospects, to which Shinnok is uninterested due to her affection for Song-Ryong. Meanwhile, Song-Ryong catches a break when he realizes that the pine tree sprouts in the winter hadn't died and are actually growing on their own for the first time. This is much to the excitement of everyone, and especially Song-Ryong, who was unable to contain his emotions that his decades of hard work has finally paid off. In celebration, or rather in admission of defeat, Wang Yi gathers Song-Ryong's data and writes a thesis for him on how the reforestation was completed. Song-Ryong, however, is too humble and crosses out his name on the cover of the thesis and instead pens Wang Yi's name, saying that the names of those who did it aren't important and that the only important thing is that it helped the country. But by that logic, he should have erased Wang Yi's name too. I don't know, doesn't really make sense to be honest. Shinnok arrives at Wang Yi's office and informs him that the thesis was a huge success. Wang Yi replies that the author has been invited to Pyongyang to give a speech. Shinnok is ecstatic for Song-Ryong, but upon learning that Wang Yi's name is on the cover instead of Song-Ryong, she is overcome with anger, feeling like Song-Ryong deserves the credit, not Wang Yi. Which, yeah, he totally does, since he did all the hard work. As the seasons pass, Shinnok cannot bear to be without Song-Ryong any longer. In a tearful confession to her mother, she declares that she will go back to Mount Maeryeong to be with Song-Ryong. Her mother calls her out as mad for wanting to give up the cozy life for a life of hardship in the mountains with a man who has a stepdaughter. All seems lost for Shinnok until her father, who comes home just in time, is made aware of the situation. On behalf of Shinnok, he confides in his wife that he supports Shinnok, saying that Song-Ryong is the best man he could possibly imagine his daughter with, going on to cite his aid he gave to the train conductors and his tireless efforts to replant the mountains. Shinnok happily rides upon the same sled with the other workers on the mountain, and before long is finally reunited with her Song-Ryong. Winter soon turns to spring as Song-Ryong, Shinnok, now married with their adopted daughter Song-Yi, frolic among the spring flowers. As time goes on, they eventually give birth to a son, and many years pass by with the family living happily while the lush green forest they planted grows around them.
산골아이들을 가리키는 선생이 되라고
We were rejoined with our family many years later as Song-yi, now an adult, leaves for university. Sinok, who is upset that she has not seen her mother since she went to be with Sang-ryong, is given the surprise of her life when she is greeted by her mother, who had gathered the strength to come up the mountain to see her.
신옥이 아유, 아유, 내로구나. 신옥아, 어머니, 아유.
The two embrace and share an exchange of tears as Sinok's mother still laments that she should have never left the city, remarking that her daughter's once soft hands are now laden with thick calluses.
그래, 내 그 잘난 사람은 도대체 어디 있냐?
Sinok runs to get Sang-ryong, but is stopped by her son, Sang-chol, whom points out a nearby sika deer. Together, everybody quietly observes the deer, and Sang-ryong is beyond himself as it's a sign that wildlife has returned to the mountain. Another goal reached through his hard work.
여보, 이제는 우리 숲에도 짐승들이 찾아오.
아유, 저런.
누가 은원 없이 한 일이 있는데. 저 산봉산도 누구든 갖고 해야 할.
Later on, beside a riverbed, Sang-ryong tells Sinok that he plans to move to another barren mountain to start reforestation there. Sinok is baffled by the idea, as he'd spent the last 20 years reforesting this mountain. Later, when Wonki approaches him, he tells him that he wants Sang-ryong assigned to a city post so that he can live the rest of his life carefree. Sang-ryong refuses, however, and is intent upon leaving his wife and kids and moving to another mountain to replant trees there. Out of desperation, Wongi visits Song-yi in an attempt to get her to persuade Sang-ryong to take the city job instead of moving to another mountain. Song-yi jokes that she could never persuade her father to do anything. At this point, Wongi tells Song-yi the story about how her real father died in the Korean War and how Sang-ryong became her adoptive father purely by circumstance. Song-yi's heart is shattered by the revelation. Thinking back to all of their memories from her childhood, she is gripped with a sense of guilt, feeling like she owes it to Sang-ryong to ensure that he's able to enjoy the twilight of his life, after he took it upon himself to raise her on top of caring for the mountain.
거짓말이에요. 그건 거짓말이에요. 우리 아버지예요. 아버지.
그때부터 너는 훌륭한 두 아버지의 딸이 되었다.
Song-yi travels back home and attempts to persuade her father to take the city job, saying that she herself is going to be a teacher in the city after her graduation. This breaks Sang-ryong's heart, as he'd always wished that she'd become a teacher for kids living in the mountains. He storms outside without a word. His wife rushes to his side, fearful he'll catch a cold. Outside, he laments at his broken heart over Song-yi's desire to move to the city, feeling like she betrayed the ideals that he'd instilled in her since she was a child. He insists to Sinok that he must tell her of her adopted status if she will be that way, much to the ire of Sinok, who is fearful that it will break her heart.
그것만은 안 돼. 내가 친어머니가 아니라는 것만 해도 가슴에 맺혔겠는데 어떻게 당신까지 친아버지가 아니란 말을.
Unbeknownst to the two, however, Song-yi had followed them outside and was quietly sobbing in front of them, having heard everything. Not being able to stand seeing Song-yi cry, Sang-ryong embraces his daughter. Song-yi apologizes for daring to suggest her father not work himself into an early grave for some trees and wanting to live her own life. Sang-ryong accepts her apology, and the two continue to embrace.
옳다. 내가 너의 친아버지다.
아버지, 제가 잘못했어요. 제가 아버지 마음을 미처 모르고 아버지를 괴롭힌 전령사들.
내 딸아, 이제 됐다. 그만해라. 숲을 못 버리는 내 마음을 알았다니 고맙다.
아버지,
성이야.
In the film's epilogue, we see Song-Ryong deny Wang-Yi's request to move to the city one last time, saying that his purpose in life is in the mountains, saying that every man must leave a trace in this world, even if it's by planting just one tree, and that even the most barren mountains can bear fruit if given enough love and care. Song-Ryong's life of reforestation and hard work catches the eye of Kim Il-sung, who invites him to a meeting, and the film ends with Song-Ryong and his son Song-chol making their way to meet their supreme leader.
가장 숲을 사랑하시는 어버이 수령님께서 계시기 이름 없는 이 아버지가 이런 영광을 받아 안았다는 것을.
This film is more or less a mismatch of several films I've already reviewed before. It has the same pro-peasant, anti-migration rhetoric found in A Broad Bellflower, as well as the concept of the ideal hardworking man who dedicates his entire life to his work being the standard by which all men should strive to be, that we've seen in films like Urban Girls Come to Get Married or The Favorite Young Man, where Song-sik and Young-bae share this specific trait respectively. I think the romance between Shinok and Song-Ryong mirrors that between Ri-hyung and Song-sik in Urban Girl Comes to Get Married as well. In both movies, the men are seen as obnoxious, and the two women don't initially like their male counterparts, only to eventually be won over by their Herculean work ethic, even if every other aspect of their personality is lacking, to say the least. Like when Song-Ryong literally wants to leave his home that he'd built to start reforesting another mountain in his late 40s, he doesn't even take his wife or his family's situation into consideration. His wife practically begs him not to, saying that he's done his share of hard work and that he should enjoy the remainder of his life with her, yet he is unpersuaded. He doesn't even bother to listen to her. Almost as if in North Korean movies, hard work and dedication to the state is the ideal trait for which a woman should look for in a man, and everything else is irrelevant. I will say, I like how the film takes on new dynamic relationships that I've not yet encountered thus far in my journey through North Korean cinema, in which I mean the relationship between Sang-ryong and Sung-hee. While it's nice to see a North Korean perspective on adoptive children, I must say that the entire experience comes up lacking in the end. While the story of how Song-ryong came to adopt Sung-hee is emotionally gripping, and the scene where Sung-hee mistakes Song-ryong for her father because of his uniform and runs to embrace him is touching, what it ends up doing is setting us up for the eventual reveal where Sung-hee finds out that she is adopted, leaving us waiting for the emotional reveal and the drama that ensues. And like so many other instances where they have the chance for a truly heart-wrenching or otherwise emotional scene, the director has the ball and just does nothing with it. When Sung-hee finally does find out that she's adopted, she's emotional, sure, for that one scene where she's driven to tears and hugs a tree with a convenient breeze, but that's it. The story goes nowhere with it. She's emotional for one scene, then she cries in front of her father upon realizing how wrong she was for betraying his wishes for her, and that's it. The expected conversation with Song-ryong and Sinok about, who her real parents were or why they chose to adopt her are never brought up. Instead, the whole adoption reveal is watered down to just a plot device to set up the film's climax, which incidentally has nothing to do with her being adopted, but instead about how right Song-ryong is about everything, and that everybody else who doesn't agree with his narrow-minded, one-dimensional point of view is wrong. And that brings me to the next point about this film, and by extension other North Korean films, and that's that our expectations of who is in the right and who's in the wrong are completely thrown out the window when it comes to these movies. If this movie was made in South Korea, then it would be Sung-hee, Sinuk, and Won-gi who are in the right. But that isn't the case here. In this film, the people who are only looking out for his best interests are in the wrong. And instead, the man who just spent his entire young adult life replanting a forest and is keen upon dragging his family from the comfort of their home, tearing his daughter's dreams away, and throwing them all into another barren mountain only to repeat the process all over again without one whit of concern for his family's perspective, is seen in the right simply because he shares the party's point of view. This film, and by extension others, is just narcissism at its finest, and that to me is what these movies are, just state-sponsored narcissism, whereby everything serves to stroke the ego of the regime, and anybody who suggests anything other than faithful dedication to the infallible state is either misguided, stupid, or outright dangerous. I still do commend the film for at least touching upon subjects that aren't really brought up in North Korean films, even if it's incredibly hollow and only serves to support the central theme of the film, which is that if you work hard enough that even the seemingly impossible can become a reality. Which I guess is true, but there's a million different ways to sell people on that premise that doesn't involve backbreaking work planting pine trees for your totalitarian leader while ignoring your family's desire to want to do something different with their own lives. Which again just speaks to the central theme of almost all North Korean movies, that the individual is just one cog in a collective machine of socialism, where conformity and bone-breaking labor are mandatory, or else. Still, however, the film for what it is isn't terribly boring to watch, though it isn't going to make any top 10s either. For what it's worth, the acting is good and all of the characters are passable, with my personal favorite being Sinok, as she's the only dynamic character whose personality grows as the film goes on. Plus, the film has a decent score with some nice folk songs about the forest, which to me is the real treat of this film. There is a dose of anti-Americanism as well, with the whole reason the mountain being barren is because of American firebombing, as well as they are also to blame for Song-Yi's status as an orphan. However, even this is really light compared to other North Korean films, so it isn't exactly discomforting to those who have seen other North Korean films before. So if you're going to watch it, be prepared to recognize a lot of elements from prior films I reviewed. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching, and I wish you all a happy holidays, and as always, have a great day.